Hello, everybody, and welcome to our third and final class of our Beginning Veggie Gardening for Beginners series. My name is Krista. I'll be your librarian host this evening from the Poughkeepsie Library. And please join me in welcoming our Master Gardeners from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Dutchess County. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the presentation. Please keep yourself muted and keep your videos off. If you do have any questions, please use the chat box, as our gardeners will be in the chat checking out the questions and trying to answer as many as they can. This presentation will also be recorded, so if you do miss something or you want to go back and check something out, don't worry. I'll be sending out that video probably in the next day or two, and I'll also include the other two classes recordings as well, just in case you missed those or you missed the email. So you really shouldn't miss anything with our presentation this evening. So that's pretty much it from me. Again, use the chat box if you have any questions. There'll be lots of time at the end if you have any questions as well. And that's it for me. So I'm going to pass it along to our gardeners. Enjoy the presentation.
Hello, my name is Lorraine. I'm a master gardener with Cornell Cooperative. And this evening we're going to be talking to you about vegetables that need the heat. What we mean by that is vegetables that want it warm outside, and they want their little feet to be in warm soil, not cold soil. So basically, if you were to take one of our vegetables that we're talking about tonight and plant it now, it would die. It doesn't like it cool. It doesn't like wet soil. It wants it to be dry and warm. And your presenter tonight is going to start off with Linda DeGasper. She's going to talk to you about cucumbers and squash, things that are delicious. So Linda, we'll take it over. Beans, cucumbers, and squash.
Okay, wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Linda DeGasper. Those who've joined us for the previous weeks might remember me. So today I'm going to be covering part of the heat-loving vegetables, and with Lorraine taking the rest. So first, we're going to start with beans. Okay, in the book Walden by Henry David Thoreau, I was determined to know beans. And there are lots of beans to know. We have green beans, French beans, haricot beans, wax beans, string beans, and fillet beans. In general, you can see all the wonderful colors that they come in. They are going to be divided into two growing habits. We're going to talk about bush beans and pole beans. Oops, there we go. Okay, so generally, like most vegetables, they like full sun. Technically, they can handle some part shade, but what will happen is your yield will be less. So look for full sun, which we define as 8 hours or more. You want well-drained soil. Again, most of the vegetables want well-drained soil, but with beans, it's average soil fertility, so they don't need a lot of fertilizer. You want to plant the seeds outside when the soil is warm, at least 60 degrees in our area. That generally is Memorial Day. And you want to plant them about 1 inch deep, about 2 inches apart. And rows generally are pretty far apart. You're looking at 1.5 feet to 3 feet apart, so 18 inches to 36. Just look at the packet for guidance on seed starting. One tip, I know what I do. Generally, the seeds will germinate within 8 to 10 days. When I'm planting, I'll take the tag. I'll write the date that I planted, what I planted, and then I'll put the days to emergence. So let's say if they're planted on June 1st, I'll note June 1st Kentucky pole beans, and then I'll put 8 to 10 D. That's just for me. Then that way, when you're planting a lot of stuff, you got to keep track, and those little tags help me. So beans require generally about 1 inch of water per week. In the first class, we talked about rain gauges and how important that is, because a rain gauge will help you know how much water you received. For an example, I live in northern Dutchess, and over the weekend, we had some rain, and over about a 2-day event, we had 1.25 inches. That's what I happened to receive in my garden last weekend. So for beans, you want to make sure you water early in the day. Again, common for most vegetables, so the leaves will dry. And then we want to mulch. Once we have the seedlings come up about 2 inches tall, it'll help to conserve the moisture and protect from weeds.
And Linda, it's also important to remind folks to water at the base of the plant.
Yes, excellent. Yep. Water at the base of the plant. Avoid spraying overhead sprays that just wet everything. So generally, the two types. So for a bush bean, they're going to be compact in nature. They generally grow 1 to 3 feet tall and 1 to 2 feet wide. They generally don't need staking. If you do need to stake, you can use some type of support, some canes, bamboo canes, sticks, a trellis, a tomato cage, something to give it support if you should need it. When you look at pole beans, they can grow very tall. You're looking at 5 feet to 8 feet tall. You want to have the support for them. One nice thing about vining types and pole beans is that you can have more plants and plant them around the support, and they'll use the support to grow. Some examples that we have. One thing too about vining types. For pole beans, you want to make sure that you put the supports in at the time of planting. You don't want the plant to grow and then you have to jab into the ground and cause possible harm to the roots. So here are some nice examples of a teepee. On the left, you'll see that it's basically some long sticks. It looks like possibly some type of thin tree limbs, and they're gathered at the top and tied off. And on the right-hand side, you can see that it's the same structure, but filled with lots of bean vines.
We have a question, which is hardier, pole or bush beans?
I don't think there's any difference. We'll talk more about some of the differences about yield and harvesting. That's usually the difference between bush and vining. That'll be coming up. So here's some other supports you can use. We have examples of some trellises, some basic sticks or bamboo canes. We have a nice, on the right, a lovely teepee style that's like a rack where you have them all in a row with a top support that sits on top of the two that crosses over. And then even on the bottom, you'll see just a plain fence that can be utilized as a support. So let's talk about harvesting beans. Basically, different varieties will mature at different rates. And another tip about that plant tag, so not only do you want to put the date that you may want to put the date that you planted it, because it'll help you note when to harvest. So for instance, I would put down the date I planted, but I also put down either a date or the number of days until harvest. Again, just it's one less thing for me to remember, and I keep it on the tag. In general, they're almost similar, but bush beans will come in a little bit early, generally about 50 days. The one difference, though, is that it's going to be a short harvest. Bush beans come in with a vengeance. You'll have a load of bush beans all at once, so get prepared to eat a lot of beans. However, pole beans are a little bit later to mature, and their harvest window is a lot longer, and they benefit by picking. You can extend the harvest by keep picking, because ultimately plants want to go to seed to produce the future generations. So what we're doing is we're taking that produce and eating it. So by plucking at the appropriate time to harvest, you'll keep generating, the plant will keep generating more flowers, which will become more beans. So one thing is, don't be tempted to leave the beans on longer than they should be. Bigger is not better. You'll have more of a tough and starchy bean. One thing too about pole beans is you can go until frost, so they have a long window for harvesting. So rattlesnake pole beans, here's an example of one variety. And this picture shows well how on the left-hand side, that's the appropriate size to pick. On the right-hand side, those beans are overripe, and you can tell by the bulging of the seeds inside. One thing about rattlesnake beans, they get their name from the snake-like manner in which the pods will coil around the vine. And one recommendation is that Cornell publishes a New York bean varieties, and that's in your class handout. So when it comes time for cleanup in the fall, one unique thing about beans is that it is a nitrogen fixer. It fixes nitrogen into the soil. So you do not want to pull out the roots. You want to snip the plant at the 1 inch above the soil. Compost the plant material unless it's diseased. We don't want to compost anything that has disease. It could help, keep it around and spread it. So leave the roots in the soil. The nitrogen will get fixed, and usually the soil the next year will be nice and nutrient high in nitrogen, so it'll help the next crop that's there. And so again, you don't want to plant beans in the same location, just like all the other crops. If you utilize crop rotation, you'll have better luck with a little bit less disease and insects. So I'm just going to fix there we go. Okay. So next slide we have, we're going to talk about the common pests of beans. Unfortunately, again, as a beginner gardener, you may not notice these the first year, but eventually they will know and learn that you're growing vegetables and come. So Mexican bean beetle, there on the right-hand side, you can see that they resemble a ladybug, but they tend to be more greenish in nature. And they have very distinctive spot marks. You want to remove those by hand, so hand pick. We encourage good organic cultural methods to remove these insects. And then for the spider mites, there's on the picture on the right, you'll see those little light colored, fluffy looking, those are spider mites, and use insecticidal soap and coat the leaves well. For beans, the common disease is a mosaic virus, the bean yellow mosaic virus. And you'll see the picture. It's not the best picture, like maybe, hopefully you can see on your screen, the little modeling on the leaves with the little yellow bits. That's what it would look like. And then on the right-hand side, we have common blight, which causes some browning of different parts of the leaf. So let's talk about companion planting. Some neat things that some plants will thrive next to beans. They include carrots, cauliflower, and beets, but only with the bush variety. Pole beans don't benefit from them. They also can be beneficial to have near the cucumbers and cabbage, but beans do not like members of the onion family. And then, and related is the gladiolas. So any member of the onion family, but also note that beans also can be very ornamental. Some of the beans can be quite pretty. There's one called Scarlet Runner that has a beautiful red-orange flower that will grow, so it could be attractive. So you can utilize these in some of your ornamental beds also if you want to do some mixture of edible and ornamental gardening. So any questions on beans? Okay.
There is one. I was told I could use hydrogen peroxide for spider mites and wipe each leaf, top, and bottom. Is that true?
I have not heard of that, but one thing I would check with is that we only promote good horticultural information based on data and research. So at one of the last classes, we spoke about researching using site:/.edu. So that would be something to research. If you can find an educational institution that recommends that, go right ahead. But if you don't, I wouldn't use it.
And also, oh yes, Lorraine already. Yeah, Lorraine says, I'm not familiar with hydrogen peroxide. No, I haven't heard of that either. Except for houseplants. I've heard it for houseplants, but it's also a tedious process with beans, unless it's bush beans, but vining beans. You saw on the first slide that Linda used, the very big teepee with all of those vines and leaves. And it's very hard to treat with a cotton swab to treat your spider mites that way, as opposed to using insecticidal soap.
Mm-hmm.
And we have prevention against blight. All the blights are exacerbated by watering from above.
Correct.
And so we would suggest you make sure for that reason that you're not sprinkling your vegetables. You're using either soaker hoses or watering cans at the base of the plant. On the other hand, we hear in the hotline every year that there are many rainy days in the season in a row, and doesn't give the plant the rainy days that don't give the plants time to dry up. We hear all about blight in those years, unfortunately.
Well, one of the things that we recommend is that there be enough space between your plants.
For them
You
to dry out.
know,
Yeah.
be a lot of air circulation so they dry out quickly from any water that might hit them. And in general, air circulation is the best thing that you could give your plants.
Excellent, and good tips about not spacing things too close together. Plants themselves keep humidity close, allowing enough air. So as you can see, we emphasize the cultural methods like proper watering techniques, proper spacing to help prevent disease and insects.
There's a question, how do beans climb? How could I support them?
Well, we covered that in a previous slide. I'm typing to Delia that we covered that in, with photos in a previous slide, and it would be probably helpful if she went back in the recording and took a closer look at those slides with the supports, the different supports that we recommended.
Thank you. So good. Let me keep going because we have quite a few more slides to get through. So cucumbers. We are on to cucumbers. Okay. Cucumbers are great. They're so easy to grow. Same thing with beans. They have a bush variety and a vining variety. There are some that are better for pickling if you want to pickle your cucumbers, or those slicing to eat fresh. They generally all have the same growing environment, so same growing needs, which are first, seeds or transplants. So one thing as a beginner gardener, these are easy to direct sow into the ground. They need full sun, some good soil and plenty of water. So if you want to get transplants, and you'll see them, in the stores, you'll see everything sold. Just know that you need to have warm soil for them to do well. So don't plant them too early, don't get them too early, don't plant them too early. And you want to make sure that the roots are not disturbed, because some of the vegetables, and cucumbers are those type that do not like the roots to be disturbed. So if you do buy a transplant, make sure you don't tease the roots. Try to get ones that are in those plantable pots, so you don't even have to take it out of a container. You just put it into the hole. So just make sure that you're looking at 65-degree temperatures. Again, it's heat-loving plants we're talking about. So if you have a vining variety, you want to make sure that you have enough support to grow them, because they're going to vine, they're going to grow up to 6 feet. Again, a trellis, a fence, some type of canes, bamboo setup, something to give to support. Or if you don't use a support, you can grow them on the ground. Just know that you need more space, and you want to make sure that if they grow on top of the soil, you need a barrier, so some type of mulch to make sure there's no contact with soil. And we'll talk a little bit more on that in a minute. So how to plant the seeds. Something unique about cucumbers, follow the package directions, generally 1 inch to 1.5 inch deep, 2 inches apart. The one unique thing about cucumbers is they prefer to be planted on their edge. And what we mean by that is, if you think of a piece of toast in a toaster, when you putting in the seed, you want it to be on its edge so that it's in a vertical position and very flat and straight down. That'll just help it germinate. Generally plant 3 seeds together, and then you want to thin. We talked about thinning in general. You don't want to overcrowd your plants. So as much as it may be tough, you gotta snip those ones that are not meant to be, and keep the strongest seedlings. And in general, you'll see germination happening within 3 to 10 days. So generally, again, about 1 inch of water per week. Some of the bush varieties that if you grow them in a container, you're going to need more water. Again, that's just the nature of containers. They tend to dry out quickly. If cucumbers are allowed to dry, it's going to affect the taste. So definitely avoid that. Some varieties are more likely to become bitter. Some are meant to not be bitter. Actually, I forgot to mention, give me 1 second. Let me cover this first. Okay, so you want to make sure you water early. Again, we want to avoid wet leaves, so make sure early watering allows time for it to dry. Mulch the seedlings when they're 2 inches tall. And I mentioned make sure you put the mulch down on the soil in case you do have any of the vines on the ground. So cucumbers can be heavy feeders. So again, know your soil. We recommend doing a soil test, before just adding fertilizer for the sake of adding fertilizer, but just know that cucumbers tend to need a lot of fertilizer. So know your soil first if you need to add any more. And let's see. One thing about the varieties you have in your seed packs, those who got them. For your cucumbers, we gave you 2 different types. One is called Diva. It's a 5 to 7 inch cuke that is deliciously sweet and good for slicing or for pickling. It's burpless, bitter-free, and a seedless fruit with thin, tender skin, and it's also pest resistant. And the second variety that you received was Perseus hybrid. It's a 6-inch cucumber, tender skin, crisp and juicy, and they're also disease resistant. One thing I should mention, just because I feel bad, I forgot to mention, if you have the seed packets that were provided at the library, for beans, you have a Kentucky blue pole bean that we provided. Okay, so about cucumbers, know that they do require pollination in order to develop the fruit. So here on the left is a male flower, in the middle is the female flower. You can see that once it's fertilized, the section before the flower is what actually will swell and become a fruit. And here's our friendly little pollinator, the bee, helping out. So know that we'll talk about, pests. We've often talked about row covers. Just know if you cover, sometimes you must get the row covers off before pollination. Otherwise, the flowers will bloom and they won't have any insects won't have any access to pollinate. So what about harvesting? So generally bush varieties will harvest in about 48 to 59 days, and close by are the vining types. One key thing is you don't want to pick fruit that's too old. They'll get too mature. They'll become very seedy inside and the color can be thicker. I'm sorry, the skin can be thicker. So common pests and diseases. Again, as a beginner, you may not see these first time around, but they'll eventually possibly find you. First, let's talk about the beetles. And there on the right-hand side, you can see the striped or spotted cucumber beetle. They come in both varieties. They're stripes and some of them are spotted. Know that they can carry disease, the bacterial wilt. You want to pick those bugs in the early morning and later in the day. I find that's when they're out and about and easily ready to hand pick and squish. The other thing cucumbers can suffer from is powdery mildew. You want to, again, look to use a type of fungicidal spray to help reduce that. Again, we're hoping cultural methods like proper watering can help reduce the incidence of that, but just make sure that you can remove some of the leaves if you see powdery mildew, and then look for also mosaic virus. I think on the bottom picture on the right, it's that mottled looking leaf there. So again, if you're going to compost any materials, don't compost anything diseased. So how to choose the varieties? Based on what you like. If you want to pickle your cucumbers, make sure you look for that in the seed packet information. They generally tend to be the bush type. They're shorter fruits. They tend to be thin-skinned, but they'll have little spines. If you've never grown cucumbers, I tend to always wear gloves when I'm harvesting because they have these very fine little spines that just get right into my skin. So I always wear gloves when I harvest. So pickling varieties will harvest a little earlier, but it'll be a shorter type of harvest, very similar to the bush and the pole beans. We have the bush type shorter harvest, but a lot of them, the slicing varieties will be on a vine or it could be a bush, but their fruits will be longer, 7 to 8 inches with a thick skin. And generally there's a little bit of a vining types can mature a little bit later, but you'll be harvesting cucumbers for 4 to 6 weeks. So again, another recommendation, do a variety of varieties to keep the harvest extended. Oh, also to look for recommended New York cucumber varieties published by Cornell online in your handout. Cucumbers also have companions that they prefer. So if you have a raccoon problem, they seem to be offensive to raccoons. You can also plant it near your corn to help prevent corn being raided. Know that if you slice a cucumber, it seems to have repellent properties for ants. To help repel those annoying cucumber beetles, you can sow some radish seeds as a trap crop. We talked about that for flea beetles also, for some of the arugula and other lettuces. But one key thing about the radish, you don't want to pull, you don't want to harvest, leave it there for the whole season. So it helps attract and divert those beetles away from your cucumbers. So one thing too about cucumbers, they don't like to be planted near aromatic herbs, not a companion plant. Any questions on cucumbers before we go to squash? Okay, here we are. Summer squash, first off, before we talk about winter squash. There are so many varieties out there. On your left, you'll see we have the zucchini, which is typically the green squash. In your seed packets, we have given you Black Beauty. In the middle picture, you'll see yellow squash. The variety we gave you is saffron. And then a scalloped or patty pan squash on the right-hand side. This one is an early white bush. And those who haven't tried patty pan or scallop squash, it's something great to try. We highly recommend it. So next, how to plant. Again, good, loose, well-drained soil with organic matter in full sun. Again, like most vegetables. Again, a heat-loving crop. You want to make sure the soil is warm before you plant, so Memorial Day or after. Make sure that you give it good water and consistent. Again, a common theme with a lot of the vegetables is they like consistent moisture. Especially squash appreciates that, and especially all stages of growth.
I should say about scallop squash, just to add to the promotion of patty pan squashes, children tend to, if they haven't gotten fond of yellow squash or zucchini, the green squash, patty pan squash will introduce them to it very nicely, because if you slice it horizontally so the scallop shaped, it grills beautifully. But our friend Jillian brought up her kids making patty pan squash pizza on the grill. Cover it with cheese, they will come.
Excellent. So for planting, you want to make sure that you direct sow seeds into the ground to 1/2 inch deep to 1 inch deep. You can plant in hills or rows. If you do a hill, do 4 to 5 seeds, and then you want to make sure you snip off all but the strongest 2 or 3. And then again, squash is a plant that needs a lot of room. Allow at least 3 to 4 feet between hills to allow for proper growing. And in general, you'll get some seedlings forming in 5 to 10 days. So you can also buy transplants in the store. A lot of them will be available. One key thing, because it's heat loving, don't plant too early. Any of these heat-loving plants in general will have be possibly stunted if you purchase and put them into the ground too soon. Squash are known to be very cold sensitive. And again, squash, just like cucumbers, don't like to have the roots disturbed. So if you do buy a transplant, try to get the ones that can pot right into the ground, and don't tease or touch the roots. Just get it into the ground with the least amount of disturbance. So most of the summer squash will grow on compact vines. Again, they're big plants, 4 by 4 feet you'll need for height and width. So you want to make sure that plan for good spacing. If you have the bush variety, you'll need a little bit less space, but again, you want to make sure you have good air circulation. And we talked about mulching. Again, they benefit the mulch to keep the moisture in and suppress the weeds. This is a great picture. So when to harvest. This is our friend Jillian's children from a number of years ago, in which they had let some squash grow too big. And again, they look funny, and you may think you're getting a lot of good amount of product for your time and money, but they're going to be very tough and seedy. So we have zucchini and yellow squash. Look at the recommended size on your seed packets or the tag. That way you know when to harvest. The patty pan squash, in general, it's a rule at 4 inches, pick them. And then by picking, regularly, the plant will put its energy into more flowers and more fruit. So it keeps extending the harvest. And one thing about squash flowers, like arugula flowers, they are edible. So you can look up some recipes to fry them and bake them, cook them.
I want to assure people, even though they're looking at Jillian's kids with those overripe fruits, in case you think they might not be healthy, I am sure they ate them. And those 3 children have now graduated college, so everything's fine. It's all good. We do have a question about cutting back squash. I think what Denise was asking about harvesting. You're just it's good to have bypass pruners to take squash off the vine, because they don't just come off by twisting typically.
Excellent point. Yeah, because sometimes if some fruit is or some produce is harder to harvest, and using snips or pruners to clip off the squash is definitely less risk of injuring the plant. Same thing with cucumber. Some of them will come off, some of them won't. So common pests and diseases of squash. Powdery mildew, the same thing. That's that same, it's technically a fungus growing on the leaves, and on the right you can see it's like, again, like a light coating of powder, it looks like. Keep the leaves dry, good air circulation, use a fungicide if you need to, and don't compost those.
We do have somebody, by the way, who already planted squash seeds. You are not alone. This week we're covering hot weather, veggies that like the heat, and yet every year we hear about people who got excited and just planted on a warm week in spring, and they won't, even if they germinate, they could stall. And if you plant hot weather vegetables too early, even if they germinate, they can stall and just not produce. So it's better to start from scratch. The person who asked about her squash seed, better to try again after the danger of frost is past and the soil is warm, which is Memorial Day or later.
One thing is, as those who are beginners or above, a little bit above a beginner, we want you to succeed. And that's why we're giving really basic advice to give you the best tools and knowledge to succeed. So just, keep in mind, people do push their limit and luck, as I do. I always try to get some stuff done early, but nature has its way of sticking to its own timetable.
Yes.
So the squash vine borer, again, some of these insects, what a hassle. So know that when you see the chicory flowers, those are those blue flowers that form on the roadsides. The picture on the upper right or is a picture of those. When you see those, look out for eggs on the look out for eggs on the plant stems. What the squash vine borer does is it'll lay eggs and they'll burrow into the plant stem. The picture in the middle is one of the grubs, larvae. And what it does is it eats the plant from the inside out. What'll happen is you'll see the plant wilt at that section. So look, if you do happen to see a section of the plant wilting, look for this, identify it. You want to cut it out. And what you can do is with the remaining parts of the plant, bury them into the soil. The stem of the squash will start to root out. So you can, don't feel like you lose the whole plant. You can still save the plant or the vine by just burying the good part, but get rid of the damaged and the damaged part. And as we always promote, rotate your crops. So that way they don't, the insects, they'll come right back to the place where they were if you keep the crops in the same place. So keep rotating.
Meaning rotate every 3 years. I mean, you don't want to plant that same squash in that space again for 2 more years.
Exactly, usually and ideally 4. So if you're as a beginner too, especially if you've newer gardens, is aim for 4 years to rotate. So other pests, we got the spotted cucumber beetle and striped cucumber beetle that we spoke about before. They like squash too. So here you see on the right-hand side, the spotted variety and the striped one. Again, hand pick them, use some row covers and tents to to protect the fruit. However, squash need to be fertilized. So you need to once the plant starts to flower, you need to remove any cover. So again, and those beetles can transmit the bacterial wilt. Okay, so companion planting for squashes. Nasturtiums are very known to repel squash bugs. That picture on the right is one variety of nasturtium. And then also radishes, very popular for another repelling as a crop for flea beetles that could also affect squash. And the last part we have for winter squash is pumpkins. Pumpkins, there are so many types of pumpkins out there, some that we use for baking and some goods and some that we use as jack-o'-lanterns. Know that they take a long time to mature. So make sure you look at the seed packet and count back to when you should be planting them. The flesh can be used in soups and casseroles, pies and muffins. There's some small varieties that you'll see, especially small sugar varieties that are meant for cooking. They generally taste better than the large varieties that we know to use as a jack-o'-lantern. So know that generally they take up a lot of space, so a lot of people tend not to grow them, but know that it is another thing to grow. So what they need is full sun, just like most of the other vegetables, nice well-drained soil with organic matter. You're going to look to plant these in hills also, 2 to 3 feet apart, again, allowing a lot of space, because they really can spread 5 feet to 15 feet, and the plants can get up to 3 feet in height. Again, a warm season plant, so they like the soil to be at least 65 degrees, and the seeds will germinate in 5 to 10 days. Keep mulching, again, we keep weeds out and keep the moisture up, and try to keep consistent moisture for the plant. One thing that I know for harvesting, one thing about pumpkins, which is nice, is that look for the vines to die off. Then you know that the pumpkin is ready for harvest. So you'll see the vines die, you'll fall off the stem. Unless you have a threat of frost, then you want to harvest them. So one thing about pumpkins, don't hold them by the stem. Without the stem, they'll more readily rot. And then you can also, just like some other vegetables, you can put them in a bag with apples, which emit the ethylene gas, to have immature pumpkins ripen. In general, you can actually, again, a little factoid about pumpkins is you can keep them for a couple of months, but if you cure them at 60 degrees for 2 weeks, they'll keep even longer. One thing I found, as a quick story, I know I had a jack-o'-lantern that I let stay out a little bit too long, and it wound up becoming mush and kind of sloughed off into the soil. And then sure enough, the following year, all the seeds were all over the place, but unbeknownst to me, and though I had done some cleanup, some seeds still got into the soil, and sure enough, I had a whole bunch of pumpkin seeds growing where the jack-o'-lantern had been on the ground. So pretty fun. Okay, pests and diseases, again, similar to the squash family in general. The cucumber beetles will look to get there, the squash bugs. One thing that the viruses, aphids are another, we've spoken about aphids before, but they also can transmit the mosaic virus, and sometimes it'll show up on the fruit also. And of course, powdery mildew, that tends to be a very high occurrence of powdery mildew, and that'll cause the leaves to die. Okay, any questions about that? That's the end of my section. Next will be Lorraine Seach. She'll be talking about tomatoes and peppers. So let me stop sharing.
And that was great, Linda, but now we have the tomato queen.
I don't know. I said to share. Are we sharing?
Yep, we see it.
Yes. You can click on from current slide.
I'm here. Here we go.
There you go.
Hey.
Yep.
worked. Okay. So, believe it or not, if you have a garden, any kind of garden, even a flower garden, it's just not complete without planting a tomato in there. Tomatoes are the most popular garden crop. In fact, most people decide to start a garden, a vegetable garden, because they want to grow tomatoes. Because there is nothing like eating a fresh, homegrown tomato. The tomatoes you buy in the store are cardboard. And it was interesting. I was reading an article in a magazine, and it said that some people actually, because of COVID last year, grew a garden of vegetables, and they never realized what a real tomato tastes like. So I would offer the suggestion to everyone that you find the tomatoes you like and plant them. Tomatoes are a warm season annual. That means that you can't overwinter them. Believe it or not, there are more than 4,000 varieties in many sizes. Let's see. Many sizes, colors, have in the store, you typically only see a red tomato. Well, there are pink, orange, green, purple, white, black, yellow, and striped tomatoes as well. And it all depends on the variety. That's what those 4,000 plus varieties are all about. They're all different. And tomatoes come in more than one round shape. They could be round and large or small, tiny and pear-shaped or grape-shaped. And they also could be long and pepper-like. And believe it or not, a tomato is a fruit, not a vegetable. For tax reasons, it ended up being called a vegetable, but it's really a fruit. And this past weekend, I was looking something up, and I happened to stumble on a World Tomato Society. There is a World Tomato Society of over 925,000 people in a global community who are really concerned about preserving the variety of tomato diversity, and they're also concerned about food justice issues worldwide. So that was kind of cool. All these people who love tomatoes. Oops. Okay, growing requirements. In order to grow tomatoes, of course, they're a warm season crop, and they love the sun. They need full sun, which means 8 hours or more of direct sun. If you're down south, which we're not, you probably could get away with less hours because the sun is hotter down there. But for us, it's 8 hours. The soil should be well drained, and it should be fertile soil that's high in organic material, which means organic compost. Tomatoes could take slightly acidic soil. That means the pH could be as low as 5.5. But a pH of 6 to 6.8 is what's recommended, and that's the typical pH that we have here in this area. And as you heard Linda talk about two different types of vegetables, the same thing applies here for tomatoes. We have two types. One is a bush and the other is a vining. So first I'll talk about the bush type. The bush type of tomato is known as a determinate, and you'll see that on seed packets or on seed labels in transplants that you find in the nursery. What that means is it has short branches, and the flowers and the fruit are at the end. And they're usually early variety of tomatoes. Now, the thing about determinate or bush tomato means that when it's harvest time, guess what? You get your harvest all at once. So that would be typical like a patio tomato, which are great for containers. You can see at the bottom of the slide, it says 70 days. So 70 days after you put the transplant in the soil, you'll have a crop of wonderful tomatoes. The other type of tomato is known as a vining type or indeterminate. And this type of tomato continues to grow all season. And what will kill it is a frost. So we'll produce tomatoes again and again until it gets too cold and frost descends on the plant. Some of the tomatoes that you may know of are like Big Beef or Sweet Million. They're vining tomatoes. The tomato varieties are also distinguished by days to maturity. The reason for that is it's a warm season crop and it could take a long time for the tomatoes to get ripe. So, you want a variety of tomatoes so that you get some early ones, which means it will be ready in less than 65 days. Some mid-season ones, which are 65 to 80 days, are late tomatoes. So around Halloween, if we haven't had a frost yet, you're still picking tomatoes. So when we talk about days to maturity, remember, it's very important to realize that we're talking about the number of days to harvest from the day the plant is put in your garden. When you buy transplants, you want to choose plants that are sturdy, short, and dark green. You want to avoid plants that are leggy, tall and leggy, or yellowish, and also plants that are already flowering. You may think, oh, I have a head start, it's flowering, or even worse, you buy this tomato plant that has one little tomato forming. And you think that, oh, I'm going to get tons of tomatoes from this. Guess what? That mature plant is going to stall when it gets put in the ground. Trust me, I've tried it. And I'm so shocked. My tiny little tomato that I started indoors versus this one that I spent a lot of money on from a nursery, put them in the ground at the same time. Guess what? The one who was already with little tomatoes, it just petered out. Where my little one, it grew and grew and grew and gave me lots of tomatoes. So when do I put my tomato plant in the ground? We advise you to wait a week or two after the last frost. Because remember, we talked about the soil. These plants want their feet to be warm. They don't want to be cold. And for tomatoes, they want the nighttime temperature to be consistently above 45 degrees. What will happen is cold soil and air will stress your plant and it won't grow as well, or it won't produce as much fruit as you'd like. When you're planting tomatoes, you have to plan for a lot of space. And remember, we talked about having air circulation. So if you compact the plants and put them all close together, you're inviting disease. So you have to plan for a space of 2 to 6 feet high and 2 to 6 feet wide, depending on what variety you're planting. And when you put your plant in the ground, you should put the method that you're staking at the same time, so you avoid disturbing the roots. You could plant the plant deep. When you put the stem in the soil, roots will be formed along the buried stem. So you want to plant it deep so that the soil is just below the leaves. And if you have cut worms in your area, or you just want to protect your tomato plant, add the collar, the cardboard collar that we talked about, or plastic collar. And of course, we want you to mulch to prevent splashback and to keep the soil moist. And also, with all plants, we want you to water deeply and avoid getting the foliage wet when you water the plant. Watering deeply is so important because it makes sure that the roots get a lot of water, and the plant, if it's just watered on top, the watering it on top will just dry out when the sun comes out, and the tomato plant will not have gotten enough water. To support a tomato, of course, in the picture you see these nice colored tomato cages, as well as other methods. There's some metal poles there with twine that are weaved back and forth. They'll hold up your tomatoes. As well as you can see in the middle picture on the bottom, this one, it has a stake along the tomato cage. The reason for that is some of these tomatoes are so big that they'll pull over your tomato cage. And the last one, of course, has one of these tomato cages in a container. Even if they're in a container, they need to be staked. Okay. This picture, Cornell put out mainly for commercial farmers who are dependent on getting a good crop for longer than possible because they have a greenhouse that's heated. Okay, so it's good information for everyone. What they advise is to prune for a strong plant, and they call this the Y. Here's the Y. So what you want is, see this here? This is called the sucker. The sucker is the first flower cluster that grows between two branches, and you want to remove that. And they always say it's optional, but now I've learned that it's really not so optional if you want a healthy plant, because it'll allow for more air circulation. So if you have the patience and the time, I would advise breaking off all the suckers. And then they advise taking the leaves and suckers off at the bottom, because a splashback and diseases that might come onto the plant from lower leaves. Okay, here we go. Look, it's a tomato. That's not a red tomato. How to fertilize tomatoes. First of all, since you're going to eat it, we advise you using organic fertilizer. And whatever kind of fertilizer you buy, please read the directions on the package, because the worst thing is you would hate to kill your plant because you put too much fertilizer. So when you first transplant your tomato plant into the ground, put some fertilizer then. And then again, when you start harvesting your tomatoes, give it some more fertilizer. And if you're getting a good crop, that means it needs more fertilizer. But like we talked about with bush tomatoes, which you get your crop all at once, there's no point in fertilizing them, because that's it. You get one chance at a crop and that's it.
Lorraine?
Yes?
I have a question. Could you go back to the pruning with the Y and pinching out the sucker?
Yes.
So let's say the plant is growing and you're pinching out the sucker upon planting, if it has one, and you keep planting them. Is there ever a point in which you stop pinching out the suckers?
No, if it keeps making suckers, you keep breaking them off if you want to do that. It's optional, you know, like if you get tired of pulling suckers and don't want to look at another one, then don't do it. But it does allow for more air circulation. Now, chances are your harvest could be less, but the tomatoes that you do harvest, chances are they'll be bigger.
And it'll be a healthier plant.
Yes.
Because I find just in my own personal experience, like I'll remove the suckers up until a certain point, because by removing the suckers, you're really creating like a central leader. And I found at one point, one of my early forays with tomatoes was I kept pinching the suckers to the point where I had gotten essentially an indeterminate tomato that grew up to the 5-foot trellis, and then it went down and literally grew about 10 feet because it was a central leader, and I kept pinching all the suckers. I've since kind of do a balance where I do pinching the suckers in the beginning for the first good 3 feet, and then I find after that the plant will get more bushy on top. Just wanted to share that and what your thoughts were.
My thoughts are that's fine. I've done that as well. In fact, I'll be honest, I'm not good about pulling off suckers.
Yeah. Yeah. We give up at a point, we all do. But yes, if it's bushier at the top, it also has a better chance of that more congested foliage drying. Whereas the closer to the soil, you know, like you say, Linda, the first 3 feet, the lowest 3 feet is the most likely to catch a disease. So you, if it's bushier at the top, you know, it's more exposed to sun and air up there, and so it's less likely to be diseased.
Okay, we'll go back to here. Common problems. The picture at the top right is blossom and rot. And the reason that this occurs is because your tomato lacks calcium. And also because maybe your soil wasn't kept evenly moist, but more than likely, it could be a calcium problem. So one of the things that I do is I save my eggshells, and I use the eggshells in soil around my tomatoes. The second one is deformed fruit, which we call cat facing. And what causes that is cold weather. Your tomatoes have started to form and cold weather comes in. There could be incomplete pollination, and so your tomatoes are deformed, but they're still edible. You could still eat that. It's just like strange looking.
Yep.
And the other one on this slide is called cracking. It happens when if you haven't kept the soil evenly moist, then all of a sudden the rain comes and the tomato says, "Oh, I get a drink finally." And it has a big drink and it splits. So the moral of the story, and like all of the three reasons for, well, I shouldn't say three. The middle one doesn't say because of moist. But anyway, keep your soil evenly moist with all your vegetables, and it does prevent problems.
Yeah.
Okay, now we get the real pests, the insects.
We should say, Lorraine, that this slide is where we want to emphasize that you have provided your favorite handout. What's wrong with my tomato? So there's that. If you want to get into insects and diseases, you can go to Lorraine's handout.
Yes. In fact, this is a part of it from the handout. What I will say is this guy here, he's a tomato hornworm. And this is a small picture, but this hornworm could easily be 3 inches long. And sometimes you'll see this hornworm in your garden with like little pieces of white rice on it. That means that wasps have descended on the hornworm, and it's eating the hornworm. So, and these are good wasps. So if you find a hornworm with little pieces of rice on, leave it be.
Well, those aren't rice, those are eggs.
Right. Sorry, but that's what it looks like.
They look like rice, but they're actually eggs, and you really need to leave it because nature will, that's the circle of life, folks. Those eggs will hatch, and they will eat the hornworm for you.
Yes. Thank you, Chris. So, and here's some other pests that could hurt your tomato. Aphid, where you spray with a hard stream of water. Colorado potato beetles, flea beetles, and that's where when your plant is small, you could actually use row covers. The cutworm, which we talked about, that's what it does. It just cuts the bottom of your plant. And then the white flies, would typically you'd find it in a plant that you're purchasing. So look at the plant, make sure it looks good before you purchase it. Okay, stink bugs. We all know what stink bugs are. And stink bugs have taken to attacking our garden. And you can see here, whoops, look at all the little spots where the stink bug decided to take a bite. Well, it leads to cloudy, but guess what? You could still eat this tomato. It's okay. You may not want to eat it, but you could. If you pick off too many leaves, your tomato could get sunburn. And this is what sunburn looks like. It's like gray and kind of icky looking, or it may just have yellow shoulders on top of the tomato. So be careful. You can't remove all the foliage from your tomato, otherwise your tomato plant, otherwise your tomato crop won't be as good. And of course we have the fungal diseases, which may blow in the wind over to you that you hope don't. We have early blight, late blight, powdery mildew, the wilts, and this one is Septoria leaf spot. Septoria leaf spot stays in the ground. Once you got it, you got it. And it's prevented by minimizing the splashback that you get by mulching on your plant on the ground.
Meaning that if you mulch, then you've both mentioned splashback. That means that if you have bare soil and you water, or just the rain will bounce off of the soil and take diseases that are in the soil back onto the foliage as the drops bounce off the ground and up. But if you mulch, you don't get that bounce back.
That bounce back is high. It's kind of like, look at a building when the rain comes, or pillars on the ground. You could see the watermarks as they climb up the house or the pillars. So you try to avoid that in your garden by mulching it. Okay, the best practices to prevent problems with your tomatoes are to wait out the cold temperatures before planting. And that's why we advise we do have a plant sale this year. We're having a plant sale. It's in middle of May, like around May 11th, you could order your plants and then pick them up that weekend by appointment. But what we tell our customers when they're buying the tomato plants is plant them after Memorial Day. Wait out the cold temperatures before planting. It's very important. Every variety of tomato plants has its own resistance to various diseases. And if you have, from previous years, you know you have a problem in your garden, try to pick a plant that has a known resistance to that problem. Again, avoid crowding and promote air circulation between all your plants. Eliminate weeds around plants. Weeds are bad. They take energy from the plant and they also contribute to splashback. Keep your soil evenly moist, but water carefully. Again, avoid wetting the tomato foliage and mulch to avoid splashback. If you do have leaves that are infected with fungal disease, wait to remove them when the plant is dry, if possible. Wear gloves and collect the leaves and put them in a plastic bag. And whatever you do, do not touch a healthy leaf after you've pulled off or cut off fungal disease leaves. Keep your hands away from uninfected plants. And it's important for crop rotation. I know, especially in my case, because I plant so many tomatoes, it's hard to avoid planting in the same spot year after year. But try at least not to plant a tomato in the same spot for at least 2 years. And more years is better. In the ideal crop rotation plan, we talk about 4 years. In the fall, to clean up, we want you to remove all plant material, including the roots, when you talk about tomatoes, because we don't want diseases to overwinter in the soil. So again, to reduce future disease, don't put these plants in your compost pile. Practice good crop rotation and avoid planting them in the same spot. Okay, now we're going to move on to peppers. Peppers are another crop that takes a long season to grow, and they're typically from tropical America, which really needs a long season to grow. In fact, some really hot peppers, which are very popular in the tropics, can take up to 150 days to mature, where that would never work for us here in New York. So we typically have tomatoes, or I should say peppers that have a shorter season that may grow with 60 to 120 days to mature. The peppers themselves, they're many sizes. They could be tiny and large. They could be pointy and round. How about red, orange, yellow, green, purple, brown, and black? There are many varieties. They could be sweet, spicy, and hot. And there's tomatoes, or peppers, I keep saying tomatoes, excuse me. There are peppers that are ornamental as well as edible. So in New York, like I mentioned, they're a very tender animal, and at times they could really be a challenge to grow here. So like tomatoes, full sun, 8 hours more or more of direct sun, and again, well-drained, light, moderately fertile soil that's high in organic material. The soil must be warm, and it, again, like all plants, they need a steady supply of water for best performance. The pepper varieties are often classified by shape, even though either one could be hot or sweet. We have the bell pepper, the round cherry, the heart-shaped ancho, the long cayenne, and the chili. Two of the hottest peppers that are grown in New York are the Tabasco and habanero. And again, just like tomatoes, we talked about variety depending on days to maturity. Early peppers are considered to be 65 days or less, but the main season of peppers is 65 to 120 days. And again, it's the number of days from the day the transplant is put in the garden, not when the tomato seed or the pepper seed is first planted. Peppers usually, all peppers start out green, but when they ripen, they could turn to other colors. When you buy transplants, same as the tomatoes. Choose plants that are sturdy, short, and dark green. Avoid long, leggy, yellowish plants or plants that are already flowering, because again, they could stall when they're put in the soil. When do you plant a pepper? Well, this is even more important for peppers than tomatoes, is to wait until last frost. In fact, it's even probably better that you wait 2 weeks after Memorial Day to put your peppers in the ground, because you want the nighttime temperatures to be consistently above 60 degrees. Cold air and soil can stress out your pepper plant and it will affect your harvest. When planting the pepper crop, it's going to spread, so you have to plan for that. Plan for a spread of 1 foot to 3 feet, and the plant should be 1 foot to 2 feet apart in rows 2 feet to 3 feet apart. The height will be 1 to 3 feet. So the pepper should be staked or trellised in some way. Staking or caging, you can use tomato cages for your peppers, that works well. It will support the heavy fruit. And again, mulch and water deeply to avoid hurting the foliage. Fertilizing pepper, you're going to eat it, so please use organic fertilizer. Follow directions on the package. First, use when transplanting, and again when the plants start to be harvested, and then again as needed if you still have a lot of peppers that are on the vine. When you harvest a pepper, you're going to cut them. You're not going to pull them off the stem. So be careful when you're harvesting hot peppers. You could harvest them when they're young and green, or allow them to stay on the vine and change color while they mature. Wear gloves when you're harvesting your hot pepper and avoid rubbing your eyes. Harvest sweet peppers when they're firm, full size. You could allow them again to stay on the plant to change color, or you could pick them when they're green. If a frost is coming and you're going to be saying goodbye to the pepper plant, harvest the whole plant, cut it and hang it upside down in a warm place until the peppers ripen. Common problems, like with the tomato, you have the blossom end rot problem. Also, you can have cucumber mosaic virus, and that's the pictures like here. Or you could have a problem like poor fruit set, which it becomes a weird looking pepper. And that's typically because of cold weather. You might have a cold or a poor fruit set. In the fall, to clean up, remove all the plant material, including the roots. And to prevent future disease, we want you to discard it. Don't put it in your compost pile. And practice crop rotation, where you avoid planting the pepper in the same spot for at least 4 years. And that's what we got. So everyone, enjoy your vegetable garden. We thank you for listening to our presentations. We hope that you
we have an interesting question.
Okay.
For particularly for newbies, but really, I think we've all had this question. When you take a seedling from a cell pack or from a 4-inch pot, when you've bought it from the nursery, how do you remove the transplant, the seedling, without damaging the roots, or with the least damage to the roots? And it does depend on how root bound. We say root bound when the roots have started to circle the soil cube that's in that. You know the difference between roots that are fragile and roots that have really gotten to the point where it's hard to get it out of the container without damaging roots. But then by that time, it's got enough roots that that you can damage a few, and you will damage a few getting it out. But you want to gently loosen the soil with your fingers, and free those roots from that hard cube that they've gotten to into a shape that you need to kind of disturb the roots a little bit gently with your fingers to make sure that the roots, when they go into the soil, can reach out, because the first job of that plant, and it's why we say you have to take off a little flower if there's a flower on it, is because the plant shouldn't be diverting its resources into making that flower into a fruit. It should be putting all of its resources, when you put it in the ground, to making a good root system. And so you want to treat those roots well. So that was a good question, I think. I don't know if Lorraine or Linda, you have anything else to add about roots, about disturbing the roots as they're coming out of the.
Well, some of those pots, the plant is hard to get out of. And
Yeah.
you could use a knife to, put between the pot and the soil to cut around to kind of free it from the plastic, and then kind of squeeze the plastic to make the plant sort of pop out. If there are roots that are coming at the bottom through the hole in the plastic, I kind of like gather them and shove them through the hole with my finger to make sure they go with the plant.
And Linda, you had a suggestion that you might want to, with a little bit of free time we have left, to I actually do want to treat one question from the chat box first, before we get into this. But Linda, you had a good suggestion that you might want to talk about the difference between hybrid vegetables and heirloom vegetables and what that means. But before you do, somebody has asked about sharing slides with their garden club. I want to emphasize that we are, as master gardeners, we're volunteers, but the community education programs for home gardeners from Cornell Cooperative Extension are supported by libraries and groups like garden clubs, paying a small amount to host these presentations. And we do that for garden clubs as well as libraries and other groups. So I would suggest to Elizabeth, who's asked about sharing slides with a garden club, that you contact Joyce, our Master Gardener Coordinator, at ccedutchess.org. Click on gardening. You'll find Joyce's contact information there. To contact her to ask. We have a wide list of topics to present to your garden club, but we just ask for a small donation to do that. And so to share slide, you are all being given a recording, but we would appreciate at least a contribution to Cornell Cooperative Extension for reusing a presentation. And we would really rather give your group their own presentation. So contact us. Thank you. Linda?
Hi, yeah, I'd like just to mention hybrids versus heirlooms. You may see that language being used when you're looking for seeds or for plants. Generally, a heirloom is some type of variety that has been around a long time. It can vary based on what type of vegetable. For tomatoes, the variety has to be around at least for 50 years. That has been grown and saved by seed. And the heirlooms will always be true to seed, meaning that when you have an heirloom variety, it'll become, a vegetable, a fruit, a flower, and the seeds collected from that plant will be true to the parent because it's the same genetic material. But a hybrid is a variety that has been developed by hybridizing, usually between two varieties, whether it was open or closed pollinated, and or done in a commercial setting. But a benefit of a hybrid, there can be some benefits. Hybrids have been usually bred to be either more productive in terms of how much of a yield the plant will give. It may have better disease resistance. Mm-hmm. It may have been hybridized for other features such as colors, different varieties, different textures, or whatever the plant characteristic that may be desired. So you can also tell a hybrid by sometimes the letters F1. So sometimes they won't say the word hybrid, but you'll see, this variety F1. As soon as you see F1, you know instantly that it's a hybrid. And there's pros and cons for each. One of the drawbacks about heirlooms are the diseases. They're more likely to be susceptible. So I always do a mix. So that way, like say for tomatoes, I love Brandywine. It's one of my favorite heirlooms. but I always have some hybrids that I know will be disease resistant in case I have some type of negative impact on those heirlooms and suffer some disease and don't get much of a crop.
We sell both at the plant sale coming up. The Master Gardener plant sale is online this year and will be staffed by volunteers who are going to load your car when you come to pick up. But you can order online and get a lot of information as well as communicating your questions by going to ccedutchess.org and clicking on gardening. And you'll see lists of what are going to be available in the plant sale, which is the pickup days are May 9th and 10th. It's the weekend. It's the Friday and Saturday after Mother's Day. Our Master Gardener plant sale always is. But you can order earlier and must order earlier for pickup those 2 days. But go and see the plant list now and see what's available, because we got annuals, perennials, flowering shrubs, vegetables, and herbs.
And
Hundreds.
I put the link to the plant sale in the chat box. And one thing just to
Good.
tout, we grow our own plants, and one thing you will not find root-bound plants. We do excellent growing procedures to make sure they are just pristine plants.
And they're timed right. Yes. Sonia, I hope that you saw Linda's link, because that will make it easy in the chat box. Thanks for that, Linda. Okay, everybody, if there are no more questions, we will turn it back over to Krista, who's been just an excellent host. We love Poughkeepsie Library. And Poughkeepsie Library has lots of books to help you with your vegetable gardening. I always recommend for gardening books, because there are so many gardening books. Oh my gosh. To get them from the library first. And even if you investigate online at Mid-Hudson Library System, you will find, even if Adrian's or Poughkeepsie Library District does not have your book, some other library in the system does. I mean, the Mid-Hudson Library System has what, 67 libraries, Krista? So somebody has that book and can get it to you in a matter of a couple days. So it's a great system. I miss it. I miss it a lot. There's a similar situation here in Massachusetts, but it doesn't work as well as the Mid-Hudson Library System does. So I always say, look at books in the library, and then if you want to buy it, if you want it for your own library, you should buy it, but you get a good chance to look at it before you do.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yes, that is correct. So feel free to check out our catalog or go onto our website, POKLIB.org. You can search our catalog there. We also have all of our other programs and events in our calendar, so please check those out. And I just want to thank you so much, Lorraine, Linda, and Chris, again, for these great presentations. I learned a lot, and I hope you all did too. And again, you'll get the recording for this probably in the next day or so, and I'll include the other two class recordings as well. And thank you so much.
Oh, can we do one more commercial? Because
sure.
I give one of my favorite presentations. Krista has signed me up to give Creating a Pollinator Paradise. And that will be Thursday, right, Krista? At 6 o'clock. Is it 6 o'clock?
7 o'clock. And actually,
7 o'clock.
Give me a
That's
second
right.
and grab the link for that. I'm just waiting for it to load.
Oh, okay.
Zoom.
You're putting it in the chat box, you mean, the link?
Yes. I'll put the link in the chat if it loads in enough time. And if not, I'll put it in the email I send out in the next couple of days.
Because, Lorraine and Linda are all about vegetables. I'm more of a beginning vegetable person, but ornamentals is my middle name. So I love Creating a Pollinator Paradise. And I created that presentation with another master gardener who is so good, Kathy Lane, at pollinators, that we made a presentation that is one of my favorites. So I hope that you can join us on Thursday, which is in celebration of Earth Day next week, right? I think that's
correct.
what you were.
Yep.
Yes, that's right. So join us for Pollinator Paradise.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much. I'll put the link in the email as well I send everybody, and hope to see you all on Thursday to learn more about pollinator gardening. And again, thanks so much for coming out, and have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Good luck with your gardens.